Welcome to It's a Woman's World, a show which discusses any and all topics under the sun from a woman's point of view. Today's moderator is Dr. Susan Strauss.
Hi, welcome to It's a Woman's World. And we've got a very interesting program for you right now. All of us that worry about our weight, especially as women. I'm Dr. Susan Strauss, and I'm your host today. And this is Nadia Jordana, and she's going to co-host with me. Hi, Nadia.
Hi, I'm happy to be here.
We are glad you are, because she's also going to do a little bit of a cooking segment when we finish here. And our special guest today is Val Schonberg. And Val is a registered dietitian, and she has her own business called Enlighten You Nutrition, located here in the Twin Cities. Welcome, Val. We're glad you're here.
Thank you.
And tell us a little bit, I think we were talking before we started, registered dietitian, nutritionist. Can you just tell us a little bit about what is a registered dietitian anyway?
Sure. Well, in the state of Minnesota, every registered dietitian is a nutritionist, but not every nutritionist is a registered dietitian.
Okay.
It explicitly states in the state of Minnesota that you need to be licensed to practice nutrition services. As a registered dietitian, we have special training in terms of working with medical nutrition therapy. So kind of think about that background of really understanding not only food science, which is really important, but also the physiology or the pathophysiology of disease and how we treat that using food and nutrition.
Well, as I was telling you before we started, when I was in nursing and we were learning about all of this, I was aghast at the role that food really plays in our health and the function of organs, and it's like almost a medication in a way, only it's natural.
I think of it that way, as is your food is your fuel.
Yeah.
And what kind of fuel you put in your body is like the kind of fuel you put in your car. If it's not good, it's the same difference.
That's exactly right. And it's also important to remember that nutrition is a science.
Yeah.
So, it's really a relatively new science. I also am a sports nutritionist, and when you think about it, sports nutrition actually became named a field in the 1980s.
Oh,
so
really?
it's really new, and people assume we know everything about food, eating, and weight, and we're still learning. And so we have to remain really open and unbiased to what we're doing with food as well, because we're always learning.
So I know that you said you deal with eating disorders and also menopause.
Yes.
And I think we think of eating disorders primarily tied in with women, but I know men can have them as well.
Absolutely.
But I'd like to go to this menopause thing.
Yeah.
How in the
Everybody
world?
does.
Especially when you get to be this age. Well, I'm
Yes.
past that, but how in the world does a registered dietitian deal with menopause?
Well, that's a great question. Part of it is that in my background in working with eating disorders, I specialized in working with compulsive overeating and binge eating disorder. And I began to see that a large number of my clients that I was working with were between the ages of 40 and 60 years old. And they would come to me with this problem of, I'm only eating 1,200 calories a day, I exercise all the time, and I'm not losing weight, and what's going on with my belly?
Yeah,
And, as we, would dive into what was really, kind of pathological, like a lot of, diet at breakfast, diet at lunch, blow it at night of things, like, okay, well, we got to get that straightened out. I started to wonder a little bit more. And then I think, as any practitioner would say, when it starts happening to you, you become a little bit more invested. And I have always, in my whole life, wanted to know why. Why is that happening? What is the physiology behind it? And
by it, I just want to make sure I'm understanding. Are you talking about it meaning how we get big in the belly? Well, I've always had a little bit of a belly, I guess, but this belly thing after menopause, is that what you mean by it?
Well, there's a number of symptoms of, right. So the it are those symptoms, those side effects of that transition into menopause. Something's changing, and women are like, okay, so what I used to do before isn't working anymore. Or on top of it, maybe someone used to sleep really well and now they're not sleeping anymore. They're experiencing hot flashes, and that's interfering with eating well.
Oh,
So it's really kind of a syndrome of sorts of, why am I gaining weight? But why am I suffering with all these other symptoms as well? What can we do about it? And in our society, where there's so much confusion and myths and misunderstandings, It's a great market for supplements and people to come in with kind of quick fixes instead of really getting back to the underlying cause.
Do supplements really help that much? And I've been taking them all my life, and I feel more and more and more like they just don't seem to make much.
Supplements?
Oh, I've taken all different kinds of vegetables, vitamins.
Oh, yeah.
And minerals,
Yeah.
those kinds of, just the normal
Calcium.
supplements, the things that you think are good. It seems like it doesn't help very much.
You know, it depends, because if there is a need by the body to have a particular extra supplement, then of course it's going to have a pharmacological effect.
Okay.
So like if someone has an iron deficiency and you take an iron supplement, well, you know, it actually can help along with eating more red meat or some iron containing foods. And the same is true with vitamin D, for example. In
that's
Minnesota, it's really hard to get, you know, vitamin D from the sun, which is really our primary source. Not to mention we want to be avoiding the sun for risk of skin cancer. So for many different reasons, that could be a really good supplement. Omega-3 fatty acids can be a great supplement for someone who doesn't like fish or doesn't tolerate that type of food and doesn't get it from some
So
other
there
sources.
is a place for them.
Absolutely,
Okay.
there is a place. But what I see is some people will come in and they'll have like a list of 2 pages long of all these different supplements, you know, for a whole bunch of different conditions that someone has kind of said, well, try this, we'll try this. And before you know it, they're actually taking toxic levels of like vitamin B6 because they're taking this complex and this and that. And so my recommendation to people is, you know, make a list of what you are taking and what you were taking it for, and then take a look at, are your symptoms improving? Is it helpful? And first and foremost, try to get that food or that vitamin or mineral from food
From
first.
food,
Yes.
You know, that, because like I said before, there's a lot we don't know. And so food is always going to be the best source, most bioavailable to the body. Back to vitamin D, you know, there's like eggs are a great example. People always think they want to avoid the yolk. Well, the yolk is where vitamin D is, and it's so perfectly created by nature because we need fat to absorb the vitamin D, and so the yolk is where the fat is, of course. So when people start cooking with egg whites, I mean, that's fine, but you really missed out on some really important nutrients that are naturally occurring in a food.
I'd like to go back to this menopause belly business again.
Yes.
So what causes us to get this darn belly at menopause?
Right. Well, there's a number of different things. So there is, a real tendency of our body as estrogen decreases to store fat more in the midsection than in our hips.
So it's
or our lower.
associated with hormones.
It's definitely associated with the change in estrogen. So as estrogen declines and basically we don't need it anymore because we're not in reproductive years, our body tends to store that fat in the abdomen. So there's a number of other things that are happening, which are kind of a perfect storm of sorts, because estrogen has receptors throughout the whole body, including the brain. So as estrogen is declining, it affects our energy level. Like we don't have like the Energizer bunny, like the get up and go that we used to have. So that's part of it. There's also, as we're getting into those years, there's natural aging, which is called sarcopenia, which is when your muscle, your lean tissue, just naturally declines. And so that contributes to additional fat storage, and the body is preferring to store it now in the abdomen.
Any special reason that it picks that location?
No, there isn't really a good answer for that. Part of it might be related to, theoretically that it's protecting our organs, right? And we don't need the fat around our reproductive organs as much anymore. But the problem with that kind of fat, when it's stored in the abdomen, it becomes what's called visceral fat compared to subcutaneous fat, which is kind of where subcutaneous fat is the fat you can kind of see. Visceral fat is a more metabolically active tissue that can promote more inflammation. So it becomes this vicious cycle. The final kind of what I call a perfect storm of sorts, though, is that I see a lot of women who, there's a huge percentage who have been dieting for many, many years, right? Just diet cycling on and off. And it's actually a state of kind of feast and famine on the body. And when that happens, and we have research to back this up, so even premenopausal state, when you diet, restrictive eating, and then eat more, and then diet and eat more, what happens is that when the body gains weight during that situation, it tends to store it in the abdomen. And so, you put all these things together, on top of what's happening just lifestyle-wise, right? I mean, there's a lot of women when they're going through the menopause transition, maybe they become empty nesters, and that's either a good thing or not so good thing. Maybe they're more sedentary, they're eating out more or traveling more. And so all this comes together, and now we're storing more fat. And so it's really addressing, okay, so we know that's happening. What can you control? Well, you have to make sure that you're keeping active. You have to intentionally do activity. It wasn't just, we don't have that same get up and go, so now you have to intentionally do that. And then the muscle part, making sure you're doing some resistance weight training to, and I always say lifting more than a soup can, so that you're maintaining as much of that lean tissue as possible too.
I guess, and you really also have to, with food choices, we all know we should make better food choices, but maybe we should also realize that when we do splurge, that should be less often and in smaller quantities and sizes than we ever could do it that way before, because it's going to be that much harder to, it's not just, I'll just go out and take a walk and work it off.
Yeah, and in fact, it's really hard to just go take a walk and work it off.
when you look at the number of calories in, so let's say a dessert, a complete indulgence, and how long it takes to work, I've been out there walking every day for an hour or more, and it doesn't burn up that many calories.
Right.
Now, I have a question for you. We know diabetes is getting to be just an epidemic. I just read that the CDC came out that 40% of American women are overweight. Maybe they were obese. Do you remember? I haven't seen that. It was 40%. It just came out. I think I think more than 40% of women are overweight, though. Maybe it was 40% were obese. I should remember that. I don't. So when I think about that, and then isn't there a metabolic disorder that has to do with some of this visceral fat? And isn't there a connection between the diabetes and the metabolic disorder? Could you speak to that?
It's referred to as metabolic syndrome.
And
it's really that the weight issue along with diabetes and heart disease. So it's kind of all of those together. Okay. And this is what's really tough in our culture. We've become really, like with the obesity epidemic, people are really afraid. And there's a lot of fear-based messages, a lot of shame-based messages around weight. And so we kind of have this all or nothing thinking, and a lot of people feel like they can't do it right. I mean, when you think about women, no matter what their age, I mean, if you're a young woman in the reproductive years, you're expected to potentially work, take care of the house, have perfect children.
Yes.
I'm so glad I'm not in that generation at this point. And it's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of emphasis around perfectionism, right? And so, we get really afraid of these terms about diabetes and obesity. And instead of getting back to, let's focus on what people need to be doing. We definitely live in a toxic food environment that's very predisposed to be sedentary. And yet we can take direct action, really focusing on nutrient-dense foods. I mean, I love what you do, Nadia, with, growing a garden and, just like the cooking demo we're going to do today. More people need to get back to what they can control. So cooking more at home, cooking as much from scratch as possible, moving your body in ways that you enjoy. Some people have a horrible relationship with exercise. We talk about moving and then they think, I have to do 45 minutes on the treadmill at 55 to 75% of my maximum heart rate. And that just doesn't even sound fun anymore. Whereas you could go garden for a couple hours, and that in and of itself has a direct effect on managing blood sugars and helping that person feel well, which again is feeding the brain in terms of decreased stress and anxiety and improving sleep. And that's where it all really resolves together.
When you think of women in particular, since that's where our focus is, and you think about giving us pointers about what can we do to be nutritionally sound in the food choices that we make. What do you recommend, especially when people don't want to? I mean, what do you can't change that. So
that's really the first problem.
yeah, it is the first problem.
If there's no motivation to change, I mean, that's really tricky, you know, and we know in change motivation theories, you know, when someone really doesn't want to change, it's about education. But it's about positive education. And right now I see a lot of really shame, fear-based messages that, you know, make people rebel and kind of go the other way and isn't helpful. So education, good education in terms of fun cooking, activity that, you know, I always tell kids when I'm speaking to a group of high school students, you know, I'll bring up the exercise thing and I'm like, but it's play. Just go outside and play.
And have fun, yep.
You don't have to go to the gym, you know, but
we used to do it as kids.
yeah,
We'd
we
go
just
play
ride our
outside
bikes and right. You know, my husband and I were talking about that. You know, we would always be outside in the summer.
And now they've got, and they're not so much.
But kind of back to your question, like, what are the key recommendations? I think the biggest thing first is there is not a one-size-fits-all approach for, especially for women. It really depends on where they're at, whether it's their motivation to change or what their specific goals and needs are. So really coming at that with an individualized approach. And from my perspective, I really bring two things together. Of course, there's the what of eating, which is generally what people are asking, like in your question, what should we be eating? What's the best thing? And there's a lot. You can just Google that and, you know, get tons and tons of information about this, that, or the other thing. And of course, we know, I mean, most people know this, of course, nutrient-dense foods that include plenty of fruits and vegetables, lean sources of protein, whether that's animal or vegetarian sources, and healthy fats. You know, it really does come down to that. And, but there's the how of eating that I think is often kind of not paid attention to. So that includes cooking at home, giving yourself permission to eat enough during your most active time of the day. So, you know, I have a lot of people that are kind of have the idea of, well, I'm not hungry in the morning, so I might as well not eat because I'm going to blow it with all the chocolate later in the day. So I might as well not do it now. And recognizing, you know, if you reverse that cycle, you eat a, you know, a nice, wholesome, whole grain, nutrient-dense breakfast with some protein, probably you'll end up eating less in the course of the day. Not to mention, that is when we need to be feeding our brain and our energy levels. So those are some of the big things.
And I think, and we're out of time, but I think it's even, which we didn't even get to, how do you do it when you're single? I mean, I don't like to cook, but I used to cook all the time when I was married and my kids were young. Now I'm single. Who wants to cook?
Well, maybe that's another segment. Because I
think
was
it is.
single for a while raising kids, and I learned firsthand some ideas around that.
Well, that's a whole other segment. Thanks for joining us, and stay tuned because Nadia is going to cook for us, and you will learn some fine-tuned techniques. Thank you.
All right, we're ready to do a cooking segment that ties right into the conversation we had earlier. Last night, the producer asked me to do this cooking segment, and it was kind of last minute, so I didn't have a lot of time to plan and to prepare, but real life is like that.
Yeah.
Real life is
true.
like that, and I had company, so I thought, I'm just going to go with what's in my refrigerator and also what's in my garden.
And it looks so healthy.
It
You wouldn't find that in
does.
my refrigerator.
Well, it does help to garden, but we all have grocery stores too.
Yes.
And they have some good stuff. Now, I call this my garden fresh quinoa stir fry.
Oh,
And I start with some olive oil. And you don't really need to use the virgin olive oil if you're cooking because you're putting heat on it anyway. So this is the middle grade olive oil that I use. And I don't use a whole lot of it. And I get things going now. I've got tricolored green beans here. And
They're beautiful.
They're beautiful. The only disappointment is the dark ones lose the purple and turn green as we cook. So watch for that. Green beans take a little bit longer to cook, so I'm going to put them in early, that and a little bit of the carrot.
Are those from your garden?
Those are from my garden.
Is there a certain name for the purple green bean?
They were multicolored
Oh.
bean seeds.
I've never seen it. They are pretty.
They are really pretty. And I just rough cut, you know, this is something that I do for myself when I'm at home and just cooking. Now I have a carrot. I like to put a little in there for color, and I use, this is like a vegetable peeler, but it cuts in julienne, which makes nice, pretty, it's a little sticky, nice pretty little strips for in the dish.
Oh, what a nice little
So they
thing.
go like that, and it's not as hard as, mushrooms. I've got a couple mushrooms. I had those in the refrigerator. Again, just rough cut. I can hear it starting to heat up.
Yes, I hear that sizzle.
Well, and we were talking about how yummy everything smells, even just
Yeah.
sitting here. So.
Yes.
And of course I don't know what the good things are in mushrooms, but I put them in a lot of dishes. A little onion, this is onion, and a little piece of garlic. I think I'll chop that little piece of garlic up.
That's what's really going to add a good aroma.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting because things like garlic and onions and mushrooms, a lot of times people will enjoy those. Sometimes people don't like them at all. It can be one of those foods that goes either way, but people forget that they are vegetables.
Yeah, they are.
And they offer the same type of antioxidants and, you know, chemicals that are really helpful. So it's that variety. It doesn't just have to be, you know, the kale.
Broccoli and cauliflower.
Yeah.
So I'll get that rolling. It takes a couple of minutes. These things, the harder the vegetables are, you put them in sooner and you saute them till they just kind of start getting it. So I'm going to put the quinoa in last. The quinoa is pre-cooked, and this is just the plain. A lot of people are using the red, and the red's got the hull on it. It's a little bit better, I think, a little more nutrition, but I taste a hint of bitterness in some of it. But
What-
I use the plain most
What,
often.
what does quinoa give us?
It's a grain. There's lots of
Oh,
protein
so
in
it's
it and other
primarily a
things.
grain.
But it's,
Protein in a grain?
yeah, well, so like,
Really?
there's a lot of protein in vegetables, but they're not complete proteins. So soy foods and quinoa are two vegetable sources of protein that are complete. So we get all the amino
That's the
acids
difference.
in
Really?
in those proteins. So that's why, especially if someone prefers a vegan way of eating, it's a great way to get, you know, a good healthy source of protein. Not that they
Huh.
can't get it from rice and beans and other foods as well. But the other thing I really like about quinoa is the texture. It's, you know, a nice variety to add into your cooking. And
Yeah, I like it as much or even better than rice. I just put a little cilantro in there. Now I have what's called dragon skin kale. It's not the curly stuff, and I'll just show you how I clean kale.
Is that from your garden too?
That's from the garden, and you just fold it over and grab a hold of it and pull that hard stem off, because that's kind of a tough one. And here's another one, and another one, and okay, we're down to rough cut. I just toss it in and cut it rough, because this doesn't need a lot of time. And this is chard.
From your garden as well?
From the garden as well.
I'm
My
impressed.
mother taught me that the green chard is better than the multicolor, and that's as far as her taste goes.
Yeah.
I find she's right. It tastes just like spinach. So if you like spinach, you
I like it raw. I don't particularly like it cooked, but I do like it raw.
well, this tastes just like spinach.
Okay? So it'll be just fine.
Yeah, it will. So I'll get this going and get the vegetables wilted. Now it doesn't really matter, since the quinoa is cooked, it doesn't really matter how cooked or not cooked the vegetables become, because that's all a matter of your preferences, your taste, and how well done you want them. I like them mostly al dente. I put a little of sesame oil in here and a little soy sauce. Other times I might just go with Worcestershire and not do Asian, but this is what I had around. I think that's just the right amount in that pot. And in a moment, I'll put the quinoa in. and wrap it up, and this will be the
You know,
dish.
the nice thing about this too is you have kind of a one-pot dish.
Yes.
You know,
Oh,
so
yeah.
everything is, because that's often, you know, the biggest complaint I get from people is I don't have time.
Yeah.
You know, and we're doing this in less than 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Because the quinoa is something that, you know, I do recommend, you know, cook some of those things ahead of time, have them
Yeah.
in your freezer ready to go.
Yeah.
But
And less
now,
cleanup.
even in the cleanup, dump it on a plate, scrub it out, and
Yeah.
you're good and it's clean.
And that's the thing, this quinoa did come out of, well, no, I cooked that up last night. But I often cook it and pre-package it and freeze it. But, and that's,
Oh, it smells.
It
Yeah,
smells
I know,
divine.
I'm getting hungry
Yes.
I know.
well, I think we can put some on a plate and you guys can try a little. Let's
best
give it about
part.
15 more seconds.
Okay.
Okay, then we'll do that. Get that wilted. I'm glad that stayed on. Okay.
You want me to put it off to the side? Will that be a
Yeah.
little over this way maybe?
Yeah,
A little
okay.
easier?
Just, that's
Okay,
enough to try.
there you go.
Thank you.
One for you, Susan. I know our producer Mike is a vegetarian. He'll be trying this momentarily also, maybe not on camera,
And I would
but
guess your
I think
husband
he'll
might
like
want
it.
some.
I know,
Oh,
yeah.
yes. Is he
would
still
be
here?
He'd be the true test
All
of.
right.
He's not a vegetarian.
Oh, okay. Well, let's get just.
Are you a vegetarian?
I'm not.
I'm not either, but I eat vegetarian frequently.
But I did recently do a similar type of dish like this, and it was with quinoa, and it was a one pot. It was with asparagus
That's
and
good.
some
Okay.
onions and wood.
Okay, we'll
not
just.
gonna want a little
I
more?
will try.
All right, I'll take this little bit because I'm going out to
Okay.
eat with some friends.
All right.
So, but I'm
Yeah.
anxious. Okay, here is, oh, you got
got
that?
it for
Okay, I'll try one. In fact, hand me a spoon while I'll give. I'm like the mom in the house. I'll take this, the odd one, and leave that fork
Okay.
for that one, your husband.
Okay.
It
Let's
smells
give it a
delicious.
try.
All right.
Okay, good, and I didn't add any extra salt.
I was gonna
Oh,
just
yeah.
ask you about
And
that.
it tastes plenty salty with the little bit
it
of
does, with the
soy
soy
sauce
sauce.
that I put in here.
Well, and the nice thing about not over salting is you really do get the flavor of the garlic and,
You
and
do.
the beans.
You do.
Very tasty.
And if you can see if this chard tastes like spinach like it should.
Very hearty.
Yeah, very tasty. You'd never know there's not salt and pepper in here.
No, no. You know, you could, like when I do the Worcestershire one, then I might put a little salt and pepper in there.
Very tasty.
That's great.
So, on that note, this is garden fresh vegetables with quinoa stir fry.
I'm definitely gonna be sharing this recipe. Yeah, this is
It's
wonderful.
excellent. And then what makes it even better is it came from your garden.
It did, it did.
Very
And
good,
thank you all
Nadia.
for watching today.